Eli, maybe if you spent more time cleaning and less time standing around, we wouldn't have problems.
He wasn't the one who spilled it.
He's the cleaner. He's also a person. My grandmother told the truth. They destroyed her for it.
My father knew, and he wasn't brave enough. I came here as Eli because I needed the truth.
I trusted Eli. I don't know if I can trust Adrian.
A billionaire walked into his own bank wearing a faded cleaner's uniform, worn work boots, and a plastic name tag that read Eli. Nobody recognized him. Nobody cared. A branch manager pointed at a coffee stain near the VIP lounge and told him to clean it before important clients arrived. A wealthy customer laughed when he accidentally bumped a chair. Another pretended he wasn't even there. Then one woman stepped forward. She took the mop from his hands and quietly helped him clean the mess. She didn't see a cleaner. She didn't see a rich man. She saw a human being. What neither of them knew was that one hidden identity and one buried family secret were about to collide in a way that would change both of their lives forever. Hello everyone, and welcome to today's story. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more emotional, dramatic, and surprising stories ahead. Be sure to leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. 3 weeks earlier, Adrian Vale stopped believing the beautiful reports on his desk. For years, people had called him one of the most successful men in America. At 42, Adrian was the billionaire CEO of Vale National Bank, one of the largest regional banking groups in the country. Business magazines praised him. Investors trusted him. Politicians invited him to charity galas and fundraising dinners. From the outside, his life looked perfect. But over the previous 6 months, something had started bothering him. The complaints, not the public ones, not the complaints that made headlines. The small ones, the ones buried deep inside customer feedback reports, the ones that rarely reached the executive floor. A retired factory worker who claimed he had been pushed into unnecessary fees. A single mother whose account had been closed after a misunderstanding. A disabled veteran who said employees treated him differently because of the way he looked. Every time Adrian raised questions, the answers sounded the same. We investigated. Everything was handled properly. No policy violations were found. His executives always had neat explanations. Too neat. One Monday morning, Adrian sat alone in his office overlooking downtown Chicago. A stack of reports rested on his desk. Across from him sat David Mercer, his longtime chief of staff. David had worked with Adrian for almost 10 years. If there was anyone Adrian trusted, it was him. "You're reading those again?" David asked. Adrian rubbed his forehead. "They don't add up." David leaned back. "What doesn't? The numbers." He tapped one of the reports. "Customer satisfaction is supposedly at a record high." Then he pointed to another. "Complaints are increasing." Another. "Employee turnover is increasing." Another. "Loan disputes are increasing." David looked at him carefully. "You think someone is hiding something. I think people tell me what they think I want to hear." The room fell quiet. That wasn't a new fear. It was one Adrian had carried for years. The higher he climbed, the less honest people became around him. People laughed harder at his jokes, agreed with his ideas faster, avoided telling him bad news. Sometimes he wondered if anyone around him even spoke to him normally anymore. Finally, David asked the obvious question. "So what are you going to do?" Adrian looked out the window. A memory surfaced. Years ago, before the bank became a giant corporation, his father had once told him something. "If you want to know how a company treats people, don't ask executives. Watch how it treats the people nobody notices." At the time, Adrian hadn't understood it. Now he did. 2 days later, he approved a temporary leave from public appearances. The board was told he was working on a confidential acquisition project. Only David knew the truth. Adrian was disappearing. Not from the company. Into it. 3 days later, a middle-aged cleaner named Eli Harper arrived at the South Detroit branch of Vale National Bank. At least that was what his paperwork said. The branch sat in a working-class neighborhood. Many customers were factory workers, retirees, nurses, and small business owners. Not the wealthy clients featured in advertising campaigns, not the people executives liked to showcase. The building itself looked fine from the outside. Inside was another story. The waiting area was overcrowded. The help desk was understaffed. Several customers sat waiting while employees chatted behind counters. Adrian noticed it within the first hour. People with expensive suits received smiles. People with worn jackets often received impatience. Nothing dramatic, nothing illegal. Just small things, tiny differences, the kind that rarely appeared in reports. A receptionist handed him a mop bucket. Storage rooms in the back. No greeting, no eye contact. Just instructions. Adrian nodded. Thank you. The woman blinked, almost surprised he had thanked her. As he walked away, he heard laughter behind him. One employee whispered something. Another chuckled. He couldn't hear the exact words. But he knew the tone. He had heard it before. Years ago. Back when his family wasn't rich. Back when people looked at his father differently. The realization bothered him more than he expected. Near lunchtime, the branch manager arrived. Lydia Crane. Sharp suit. Perfect makeup. Confident walk. Everyone seemed nervous around her. Within minutes, Adrian understood why. Lydia moved through the branch like a military officer inspecting troops, correcting employees, monitoring numbers, watching everything. When she noticed Adrian, she barely slowed down. Cleaner. He turned. She pointed toward a spill near the VIP customer lounge. That should have been cleaned already. Adrian simply nodded. Yes, ma'am. Lydia had already walked away before he finished speaking. No greeting, no introduction, nothing. Just cleaner. The rest of the afternoon wasn't much better. A wealthy customer snapped his fingers at Adrian to move a trash can. Another complained because Adrian's cleaning cart was visible near the entrance. One man looked directly at him and asked if someone more presentable could clean the area. Adrian kept working, watching, listening, learning. Then he saw her. She was helping an elderly woman complete paperwork. Not rushing, not pretending, actually helping. Her name tag read, Maya Torres. Temporary customer support. The older woman seemed confused. Maya patiently explained every line. Twice, then a third time. Only when the customer smiled did Maya move on. Adrian noticed something else. The woman looked exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes. Worn shoes. A lunch packed in a reusable container. Nothing about her suggested an easy life. Yet she treated people with more respect than most of the branch combined. Later that afternoon, a coffee cup slipped from a customer's hand near the waiting area. Coffee splashed across the floor. Before Adrian could reach it, the customer frowned. Cleaner. The word sounded more like an order than a request. Adrian grabbed the mop. As he bent down, several nearby customers watched. One man smirked. Another looked annoyed by the inconvenience. Then someone stepped beside him. It was Maya. Without saying anything, she took a stack of paper towels and started helping. The customer looked uncomfortable. You don't have to do that. Maya smiled politely. It's okay. For a moment, nobody spoke. The silence felt strangely heavy. Then Maya looked at Adrian. Thanks for handling this. Just a simple sentence, nothing special. But Adrian noticed something. She was the first person all day who had thanked him. The first. As they finished cleaning, Maya returned to her desk. Adrian watched her walk away. Something about that bothered him. Not because of who she was, because of how rare simple kindness had become. That evening, after most employees left, Adrian stayed behind cleaning the lobby. The branch was nearly empty. He heard voices coming from a hallway near the employee entrance. One voice belonged to Maya. The other belonged to another employee. They sounded tired after a long day. The conversation was quiet, almost private. Adrian wasn't trying to listen. But one sentence reached him anyway. Maya sighed softly, then said something that made him stop moving completely. People with power rarely see what they destroy. The hallway fell silent. And for the first time since beginning this undercover experiment, Adrian felt something cold settle in his chest. Because he suddenly realized she wasn't talking about customers. She was talking about someone else, someone from the past. Someone connected to a wound that clearly had never healed. And somehow Adrian had the feeling that wound was connected to his name. Maya Torres left the South Detroit branch a little after 7 that evening, long after most of the employees had already gone home. She did not leave because her work was finished. In a place like Vale National Bank, the work was never really finished. She left because her son needed dinner, her grandmother needed medication, and the last bus toward East Verner did not wait for anyone's problems. She moved quickly through the employee exit, pulling her thin coat tighter around her body as the evening wind came through the alley. Her shoes were polished, but the soles were worn thin. Her handbag was neat, but the zipper had been repaired twice. Everything about Maya looked held together by effort. Not broken, not careless, just stretched. Stretched the way people became when life kept asking for more than they had. Behind her inside the branch, Adrian watched through the glass door while pretending to wipe fingerprints from the entrance panel. He had seen wealthy clients leave that building all day with drivers waiting at the curb. He had seen managers complain about lunch orders arriving late. But Maya walked toward the bus stop alone, shoulders squared, one hand already pulling out her phone before she even reached the sidewalk. "Hey, baby," she said when the call connected. Her voice changed instantly. Softer, warmer, tired, but trying not to sound tired. "I'm on my way. Did you finish your reading packet?" Adrian could not hear the child's answer, but he saw Maya smile for the first time that day. It was small and almost private. A smile she did not give the bank. A smile reserved for someone who still believed she could fix the world with enough love and enough effort. Then the smile faded. "Noah, listen to me. Don't let Grandma Rosa get up by herself. Put the water beside her chair. I'll be home soon." She stopped walking for a second, listening carefully. "No. Don't be scared. If she gets dizzy again, you call me. Then call Mrs. Alvarez next door." Adrian looked down at the cloth in his hand. Something about that conversation stayed with him. Maya was not just tired from work. She was carrying a whole household on her back. By the time Maya reached her apartment building, the sky had turned a dull blue-gray over Detroit. The building was old, brick-faced, and tired, but the windows on the 3rd floor glowed with warm, yellow light. She climbed the stairs because the elevator had been broken for 6 weeks. On the 2nd landing, she paused to catch her breath. Then she kept moving. Inside apartment 3C, Noah was sitting at the kitchen table with a pencil in his hand and a book open in front of him. He was 8 years old, thin, bright-eyed, and serious in a way children became when they learned too early that adults could be fragile. He jumped up the moment Maya opened the door. "Mom." She dropped her bag and pulled him close. "Hey, my heart." He hugged her hard, but only for a second. Then he glanced toward the small living room. Maya followed his eyes. Rosa Torres sat in the old recliner by the window, wrapped in a knitted blanket, her silver hair pulled back in a loose braid. She looked smaller than she had even a month ago. Her face still carried traces of the strong woman she had once been. but illness had thinned her. It had taken color from her cheeks and steadiness from her hands. I told him not to worry. Rosa said, her voice rough but proud. The boy worries anyway. Maya forced a smile and walked over to kiss her forehead. That's because he's smart. That's because he listens too much, Rosa muttered. Noah made a face. I heard that. For a moment the apartment felt almost normal. Small kitchen, faded curtains, a pot of soup warming on the stove, homework on the table, medicine bottles lined up beside the sink. It was not the kind of home anyone put in a magazine, but it was clean. It was cared for. It was full of people trying very hard not to let fear become the loudest thing in the room. Maya changed out of her work shoes, washed her hands, and checked Rosa's pills. One bottle had only 3 tablets left. She turned it quietly so Noah would not see, but Rosa saw anyway. Rosa always saw more than people expected. They raised the price again. Maya closed the cabinet. We'll manage. That is not an answer. It's the only one I have tonight. Rosa looked away first. Not because she was weak, but because she hated making her granddaughter carry what should never have been hers. Maya had once been accepted into a community college accounting program. She had been good with numbers. Careful. Sharp. The kind of student teachers remembered. But after her mother died and Rosa's heart condition got worse, school became a luxury. Then Noah came, and love became another responsibility. Maya never regretted her son. Never. But she had learned that love did not make bills disappear. Dinner was quiet at first. Noah told her about a spelling quiz. Rosa complained that the soup needed more pepper. Maya pretended not to notice the way her grandmother's hand trembled around the spoon. Then Noah pointed at Maya's chest. Mom, why is your badge still on? Maya looked down. She had forgotten to remove it. The plastic employee badge hung from a blue lanyard turned halfway outward. Vale National Bank. Rosa's spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. The change in her was immediate. Her face lost what little color it had. Her eyes locked on the logo. For a second she seemed to stop breathing. Maya noticed. Grandma Rosa did not answer. The spoon slipped from her hand and hit the bowl with a small, sharp sound. Noah froze. Grandma Maya stood quickly and reached for her. Rosa, what is it? Are you dizzy? Rosa's hand closed around Maya's wrist with surprising strength. Her eyes were still fixed on the badge. Where did you get that? At work, Maya said carefully. It's the bank. I told you I got placed at Vale National through the temp agency. Rosa shook her head slowly. No. Maya frowned. No what? No. Rosa pushed the blanket off her lap as if she meant to stand, but her body was too weak. You cannot work there. Grandma, calm down. You cannot take money from them. Maya felt something tighten in her chest. Noah looked between them, confused and frightened. From who? Rosa's eyes finally lifted from the badge to Maya's face. What Maya saw there made her stomach turn. It was not simple dislike. It was fear. Old fear. The kind that had been buried so long it had become part of the body. That name, Rosa whispered, took our home before you were old enough to remember it. The room went still. Outside, a siren passed somewhere in the distance, fading down the block. Inside the apartment, nobody's moved. Maya looked down at the badge again. Vale National Bank. The name she had worn all day. The name printed on the building where she had smiled at customers, helped old women fill out forms, and defended a cleaner no one bothered to thank. She looked back at Rosa. What are you talking about? Rosa's breathing had become shallow. She pressed one hand to her chest, not in pain exactly, but as if holding something inside that had been trying to escape for years. Maya stepped closer. Grandma, tell me. Rosa closed her eyes. For a moment, Maya thought she would refuse. That was how Rosa handled pain. She locked it away. She changed the subject. She turned grief into silence and silence into survival. But this time she opened her eyes. And they were wet. I worked for a bank once, Rosa said. Before you were born. Before your mother got sick. Before everything fell apart. Maya sat down slowly across from her. Noah stayed quiet, his pencil still in his hand. Rosa looked at the badge again, and her voice dropped. It was not called Veil then. Not at first. It was smaller. Local. People trusted it. People like us trusted it because we thought the people behind the desk knew our names. Maya felt her pulse in her throat. What happened? Rosa swallowed. I found things I was not supposed to find. Maya said nothing. Rosa's fingers gripped the edge of her blanket. Hidden fees. Adjusted loan terms. Families charged for papers they never understood. Poor neighborhoods marked as risk zones, then punished for being poor. It was all dressed up in legal language, clean words, professional words. But I knew what it meant. Her voice shook. It meant people would lose their homes. Maya thought of the customers at the branch. The retired man arguing about charges. The woman who cried quietly at the help desk because her account was overdrawn after fees she did not understand. The way Lydia Crane smiled at wealthy clients and grew cold with everyone else. Maya's stomach went cold. You reported it. Rosa gave a bitter little breath. It was almost a laugh, but there was no humor in it. I tried. And they fired me. Noah looked up. For telling the truth, Rosa turned to him, and her expression softened with pain. Sometimes people punish the truth when it costs them money. Maya closed her eyes for a second. She wanted to tell Noah the world was not like that. She wanted to say good people always won if they were brave enough. But she could not lie to him. Not in that room. Not with Rosa looking like a ghost had walked back through the door. What does Veil have to do with it? Maya asked. Rosa's jaw tightened. They bought the bank during the investigation. They said they were saving it. They said they were bringing stability. That was the word they used. Stability. She looked at Maya. After that, the files disappeared. The complaints disappeared. I became the problem. Maya's hand moved slowly to the badge at her chest. And our house Rosa's eyes broke. The same people who buried the truth held our mortgage. After I lost my job, we fell behind. I begged them to review the fees. I begged them to look at what had happened. They sent letters, then warnings, then a notice on the door. Her voice nearly vanished. Your mother cried in the kitchen because she thought it was her fault. It was not her fault. Maya could not speak. The apartment around her suddenly felt different. The peeling paint, the medicine bottles, the careful meals, the life built out of making do. She had always believed her family had simply been unlucky, that poverty had arrived slowly like weather. But now she saw something else. Paperwork, signatures, decisions, people in clean offices choosing what families like hers would have to survive. Rosa leaned back, exhausted by the weight of what she had finally said. Maya reached for her hand. Why didn't you tell me? Rosa looked at her granddaughter for a long moment. Because anger is heavy, baby. And you already carried too much. That sentence hurt more than the rest. Maya looked toward Noah. He was staring at the badge now, too, as if it had become something dangerous. She unclipped it from her blouse and placed it face down on the table. For the first time since taking the job, she wondered if the paycheck saving her family might be coming from the same place that had once destroyed it. Across town, Adrian Vale sat alone in a small rented apartment David had arranged for his undercover identity. It was nothing like his penthouse. One bedroom, cheap furniture, a street lamp flickering through thin curtains. His cleaner's uniform hung over the back of a chair. On the table in front of him was a notebook filled with observations from the branch. Preferential treatment for wealthy clients, dismissive language toward low-income customers, pressure around fee-based products, staff afraid of Lydia Crane. Maya Torres, respectful, overworked, unusually observant. He stared at her name, longer than he should have. Then he wrote one more line beneath it. She knows something. He leaned back, thinking of the sentence he had overheard in the hallway. People with power rarely see what they destroy. At the time it had sounded like bitterness. Now it sounded like history. His phone buzzed. A message from David. Any major findings? Adrian looked at the notebook. Then at the name, Maya Torres. He typed back. Not yet. But something is wrong here. He almost sent it. Then he deleted the last sentence and wrote something else. Find out if the name Torres appears anywhere in old Vale acquisition records. A minute passed. Then David replied. How far back? Adrian stared at the screen, feeling the first quiet edge of dread. As far back as my father. Maya barely slept that night. After Noah went to bed and Rosa finally drifted off in her recliner, she sat alone at the kitchen table staring at her employee badge. The small piece of plastic looked harmless. Just a company logo. Just a workplace ID. Yet somehow it felt heavier now. For most of her life, Maya had believed her family simply got unlucky. Her mother got sick. Medical bills piled up. Jobs disappeared. Their house was lost. Life moved on. That was the story she had grown up with. Simple. Painful. But simple. Now she wasn't sure anymore. She looked toward Rosa sleeping in the next room. The old woman had spent years protecting her from something. Maya could see that now. Not because Rosa wanted to hide the truth. Because she wanted Maya to have a chance at happiness before carrying the weight of old anger. But the truth had finally escaped. And once truth escaped, it rarely went back into hiding. The next morning, Maya arrived at the branch earlier than usual. She hoped work would distract her. It didn't. The moment she walked through the doors of Vale National Bank, all she could see was the name. Vale. 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 Every sign seemed louder than before. Every logo felt different. Every smiling advertisement suddenly looked less trustworthy. She hated that feeling. Because part of her genuinely liked helping people there. Some customers needed guidance, some were elderly, some were scared, some simply needed someone patient enough to explain paperwork. Helping them mattered. But now another question sat beside everything she did. Had this bank really destroyed her family? And if it had, what else had been hidden? Across the lobby, Adrian watched Maya arrive. He noticed it immediately. Something had changed. The warmth she usually carried was still there, but it was buried beneath something else. Thoughtfulness, concern, maybe even suspicion. She moved through her morning routine normally, but she seemed distracted. Twice she entered information incorrectly and had to restart. That wasn't like her. Maya was usually careful. Precise. The kind of employee who checked details twice. Adrian found himself wondering if something had happened at home. Then he remembered Rosa Torres. The name David had spent half the night researching. His phone buzzed shortly after opening. A message appeared. Found multiple references to Torres family. Acquisition records date back 23 years. More details coming. Adrian felt a strange knot form in his stomach. 23 years. That was around the same time his father had expanded the bank through a series of acquisitions. Acquisitions that financial magazines still praised today. He slipped the phone back into his pocket. For the first time in years, he found himself hoping David was wrong. Late that morning, the branch became unusually busy. A local factory had issued payroll deposits. Customers filled the lobby. Lines grew longer. Employees became impatient. And Lydia Crane became worse. Move faster. Don't leave customers waiting. Cross-sell checking products. Ask about loan services. The instructions never stopped. Everything felt rushed, measured, transactional. At one point, an elderly man approached Maya's desk. His hands trembled slightly. He wore an old denim jacket and carried a stack of papers. "I got this letter," he said quietly. "I don't understand it." Maya took the envelope. The man explained that he thought it involved fees on his account. He had tried reading it 3 times. Nothing made sense. Maya immediately began helping him, patiently, slowly, exactly the way she helped everyone. The problem was simple. The explanation wasn't. 10 minutes passed, then 15. The line behind him grew longer, Lydia noticed, and walked over. "What is taking so long?" The older man looked embarrassed. Maya answered calmly. "He doesn't understand the fee adjustment notice." Lydia barely glanced at the papers. "It's standard." The old man shifted nervously. "I just wanted somebody to explain," Lydia interrupted him. "The information is already in the letter." Maya looked up. Something flashed across her face. Not anger, disappointment. The older man lowered his eyes. The reaction hurt Adrian more than he expected, because he recognized it. The man wasn't upset about the fee. He was upset about feeling like a burden, like his confusion inconvenienced everyone around him. Before Lydia could walk away, Maya spoke carefully. "I'll finish helping him." Lydia's smile became thin. The line matters too. The customer matters more. For 1 second, the entire desk area went silent. Even the older man looked shocked. Lydia stared at Maya, then forced a professional smile. "We'll discuss priorities later." She walked away. The message was clear. Maya had just challenged her. Adrian watched the entire exchange. Most employees would have backed down. Not because they agreed. Because they needed the paycheck. Maya needed the paycheck too. Yet she had still chosen the customer. That told him something important. Her principles were not performative. They cost her something. That was why they mattered. An hour later, Adrian found himself cleaning near the break room when Maya entered carrying a coffee cup. She looked exhausted. More exhausted than usual. For a moment, she didn't notice him. Then she smiled. A small smile. Real. "Long morning?" Adrian asked. Maya laughed softly. "Is it that obvious a little?" She sat down. For several seconds, neither spoke. The silence felt surprisingly comfortable. Eventually, Maya looked toward the window. "Do you ever think people get so busy doing their jobs that they forget they're dealing with human beings?" Adrian hesitated. "Sometimes. My grandmother always said paperwork can hurt people just as much as bad decisions." The sentence caught his attention immediately. "Your grandmother sounds wise." A shadow crossed Maya's face. She paid a high price for being right. Before Adrian could ask more, another employee entered the room. The moment disappeared. But the words stayed with him. She paid a high price for being right. That night, David finally called. Adrian answered immediately. "What did you find?" Silence lingered for a moment. "Not a good sign." Then David spoke. "There was definitely an internal investigation." Adrian sat down. "About what? Predatory lending practices?" His chest tightened. "Was my father involved?" Indirectly at first. Adrian closed his eyes, At first, David sighed. The records are incomplete. What does that mean? It means someone removed documents. The answer landed like a stone. Removed, not lost, not misplaced. Removed deliberately. Keep going. David hesitated, then continued. Rosa Torres worked as a junior internal auditor. That matched what Maya had heard, what Rosa had said. The pieces were starting to connect, and Adrian hated how easily they fit. After she filed complaints, David continued, she was terminated. Adrian stared out the apartment window. Traffic moved below. People walked home. The city carried on normally. His world didn't. What happened to her family? More silence. Then David answered quietly. They lost their house less than 2 years later. Adrian felt sick. For the first time since starting this undercover experiment, the issue stopped feeling like a business problem. It became personal. Very personal. Because he could picture Maya's apartment, the medicine bottles, the aging furniture, the exhausted look in her eyes, the little boy waiting for her phone calls. Real people, real consequences, not numbers, not reports, not statistics. After ending the call, Adrian sat alone for a long time. Then something unexpected happened. He found himself remembering his father. Richard Vale. The man newspapers called a visionary. The man who taught him integrity mattered. The man who spent weekends volunteering at food drives. The man who had once driven 3 hours to personally apologize to a customer after a clerical mistake. That man. Could that same man have ignored what happened to Rosa Torres? Adrian didn't know. And that uncertainty hurt more than certainty would have. Because villains were easier. Villains made sense. But good people who made terrible choices, those were harder to understand. The next morning, Maya arrived carrying a small brown envelope. It looked old. Very old. The corners were worn. The paper had yellowed with age. She kept checking her bag throughout the morning to make sure it was still there. Adrian noticed. Eventually, during lunch, she sat alone near the employee parking lot. The envelope rested on the table beside her. She stared at it for several minutes, then carefully opened it. Inside were documents, old documents, pages filled with signatures, loan numbers, handwritten notes. Maya's eyes widened. She turned another page, then another. Suddenly, she stopped breathing. At the bottom of one sheet, written in faded blue ink, were words she had never seen before. Not a printed note, not a bank form. A handwritten warning. Someone had written it decades ago. Someone who knew the truth. Someone who wanted the truth preserved. Maya read the sentence twice, then a third time. Her hands began to shake, because the note said, Torres file. Never sign away the truth. And clipped behind that page was another document. One bearing a signature she recognized immediately. Richard Vale, Adrian's father. Maya sat alone in the employee break area long after her lunch break should have ended. The old documents remained spread across the table. Most people walking past would have seen nothing special, just faded forms, loan records, internal paperwork from decades ago. But Maya couldn't stop staring at the signature. Richard Vale. The name carried weight. Not because she knew the man personally, because she knew what his name had become. Buildings carried it. Scholarships carried it. Hospitals carried it. The city treated Richard Vale like a legend. Yet here was his signature attached to documents connected to the worst chapter of her family's life. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She carefully slid everything back into the envelope. The papers suddenly felt dangerous, not because they contained money, because they contained questions. Questions powerful people might not want answered. Across the lobby, Adrian watched her from behind a floor buffer. She looked shaken. far more shaken than she had after her conversation with Rosa. Something had changed. He noticed the envelope. He noticed the way she kept touching it, as if making sure it hadn't disappeared. And most importantly, he noticed fear. Not panic, not confusion. Fear. Whatever she had found, it mattered. A lot. For the rest of the afternoon, Maya struggled to focus. Every customer interaction felt automatic. Every smile required effort. Every time she looked at the Veil logo mounted behind the teller line, she thought about her grandmother's trembling hands, about the house they lost, about the years that followed. At closing time, she finally made a decision. She was going to ask Rosa everything. No more fragments, no more half-truths, no more protection. She wanted the full story. That evening, the apartment felt quieter than usual. Noah sat at the table working on math homework. Rosa rested near the window. The old envelope sat between them, waiting. Maya placed it carefully on the coffee table. "We need to talk." Rosa looked at the envelope, then at Maya, and immediately understood. "You found something." Maya nodded. "I found documents." Silence. "I found Richard Vale's signature." Rosa closed her eyes. Not surprised, not shocked, just tired. The kind of tired that came from carrying a burden too long. Finally, she opened her eyes again. "What do you want to know everything?" The answer came immediately. No hesitation, no anger, just determination. Rosa stared toward the dark window. For several moments, she said nothing. Then she began. 23 years earlier, she had worked for a small community bank serving working-class neighborhoods throughout Detroit. She wasn't an executive. She wasn't powerful. She was a junior internal auditor, a numbers person, someone whose job was finding mistakes before they became disasters. At first, she loved the work. She believed banks could help families build stable lives. She believed mortgages helped people own homes. She believed loans helped businesses grow. She believed financial institutions existed to serve communities. Then she started finding files that didn't make sense. Loan contracts with unexplained fees, interest adjustments customers never approved, foreclosure notices triggered by penalties borrowers didn't understand. At first, she assumed they were clerical errors. Then she noticed patterns. Always the same neighborhoods, always lower-income families, always people with little access to lawyers. The realization horrified her. Someone wasn't making mistakes. Someone was making money. When Rosa reported her findings internally, management dismissed her concerns. When she persisted, meetings became uncomfortable. Promotions disappeared. Colleagues stopped speaking openly around her. And eventually she became the problem. Maya listened without interrupting. The story sounded painfully familiar. Not because it was dramatic, because it was believable. That was what made it frightening. Real harm rarely arrived looking like a villain. Sometimes it arrived as paperwork. Sometimes it arrived as policies. Sometimes it arrived as people deciding certain communities mattered less. "What happened after that?" Maya asked quietly. Rosa looked at the envelope. Vale National announced they were acquiring the bank. The room became silent. Noah had stopped doing homework. Even he could feel the weight in the conversation. Rosa continued. "Everyone thought the acquisition would fix things. And didn't it?" "No." The answer came instantly. "At least not for us." She explained how investigators briefly reviewed internal complaints before the acquisition closed. Then the review stalled. Files disappeared, reports vanished, managers changed positions. The entire situation slowly faded from public view, and Rosa was fired. Officially, it was for performance issues. Unofficially, everyone knew why. She knew too much. Maya felt anger rising inside her. Not explosive anger. Something colder, something heavier, the kind that settled deep inside the chest. What happened to Mom? The question hung in the air. Rosa swallowed. She was 17, Maya's mother, a teenager, still dreaming about college, still believing adults would solve problems. After I lost my job, everything changed. Medical insurance disappeared, savings disappeared. Then mortgage payments started falling behind. The family tried to survive. But survival became a month-to-month battle. Eventually, they lost the house. Maya remembered fragments, moving boxes, her mother crying in secret, cheap apartments, new schools, constant instability. She had never connected those memories to a single decision. Until now. Did Richard Vale know the question emerged before she could stop it? Rosa looked away. That hesitation told Maya everything. I don't know. It wasn't the answer Maya wanted, but it was honest. And honesty mattered. I know his signature appeared on documents, Rosa said softly. I know he approved the acquisition. I know people beneath him buried complaints. But I don't know how much he personally knew. The uncertainty frustrated Maya. Villains were easier. Clear answers were easier. Reality rarely offered either. Meanwhile, several miles away, Adrian sat in a secured records room beneath Vale National's corporate headquarters. David had arranged access after hours. The room smelled like dust and old paper. Thousands of archived files lined the shelves. Most had never been digitized. Most had probably not been touched in years. For 3 hours, Adrian searched. Acquisition records, compliance reports, internal memos, meeting summaries. Eventually, he found something. A personnel file. Rosa Torres. His chest tightened immediately. The file was thinner than expected. Too thin. Missing pages, missing attachments, missing investigation notes. Someone had removed material. The question was why. He continued reading. Performance evaluations were excellent. No disciplinary history. Strong recommendations. Positive reviews. Nothing justified termination. Nothing. That fact bothered him more than anything. If Rosa had truly been dismissed for poor performance, evidence should have existed. Instead, there was emptiness. A carefully curated emptiness. Adrian continued digging. Then he found a document attached near the back. A short internal memo. Only 3 sentences. No explanation. No context. Just instructions. His stomach dropped. The memo read, Torres case must be removed before acquisition closes. He read it twice. Then a third time. Below the message sat a chain of approval signatures. Most belonged to executives he barely recognized. One belonged to a legal advisor, and one belonged to a man he knew very well. Richard Vale, his father. Adrian stared at the signature. The room suddenly felt smaller, hotter. For years he had defended his father's reputation. For years he had believed Richard Vale built the company honestly. For years he had carried pride in the family name. Now doubt entered the room, and once doubt arrived, it refused to leave. He leaned back slowly. The paper trembled slightly in his hand. Not because he was afraid of losing money, not because he feared scandal. Because for the first time in his life, he wondered whether the empire he inherited had been built partly on someone's suffering. And that possibility hurt more than he expected. When Adrian finally returned to his apartment, it was after midnight. Sleep never came. Instead, he sat alone in the darkness, thinking, remembering, questioning. Around 3 a.m, he opened an old family photo album, a rare thing for him. Richard Vale appeared in almost every picture, at charity events, at community centers, at family gatherings, smiling, helping, giving, looking exactly like the man everyone admired. Adrian stared at those photos, then at the memo, then back again. Neither image matched the other. Yet both existed. Which one was true, he didn't know, and that uncertainty terrified him. The next morning, Maya arrived at the branch carrying the envelope again. This time she wasn't just confused. She was looking for answers. Real answers. And somewhere deep inside, Adrian knew the same thing. Their paths were moving toward the same truth. The problem was that truth seemed to lead directly through his father's name. And the deeper he dug, the more he feared what he would find buried underneath it. The next few days passed differently for both of them. Maya carried the old envelope everywhere, not because she planned to show it to anyone, because she no longer trusted it to stay out of her sight. Every time she opened it, she found another detail she had missed before: loan references, internal approval codes, notes scribbled in margins, names she didn't recognize. The deeper she looked, the more convinced she became that her grandmother had never imagined the truth. She had lived it. And somehow that realization made Maya feel both closer to Rosa and farther away from the world around her. At work, she smiled at customers. She answered questions. She balanced paperwork. But part of her mind was always somewhere else, looking backward, trying to understand how one decision made decades ago could still be shaping her family's life. Across the branch, Adrian noticed everything. Not because he was spying, because he found himself paying attention to Maya more than he intended. He noticed when she skipped lunch, when she looked exhausted, when she rubbed her temples after difficult customers, when she quietly stayed late, helping elderly clients understand documents nobody else wanted to explain. The more he watched, the harder it became to think of her as just another employee. And that bothered him. Not because she wasn't remarkable, because he was lying to her every day. One afternoon, after most customers had left, Maya was helping an older woman close a fraudulent account. The woman was confused and scared. Someone had stolen money from her checking account. The fraud department had already sent letters. The language was technical, complicated. The woman clearly didn't understand any of it. Maya sat beside her instead of across from her. That small choice changed everything. People often felt intimidated sitting across from bank employees. Beside them felt different, safer. For nearly 30 minutes, Maya explained every form, every process, every next step. The woman left smiling, relieved, and grateful. As Maya gathered the paperwork, Adrian approached with a trash bin he didn't actually need to empty. That took a while. Maya looked up. It mattered. It wasn't your department. She smiled. People don't care what department you're in when they're scared. The answer lingered. Because it was true. So much of modern life pushed responsibility from one desk to another. But fear didn't care about departments. Fear only wanted someone willing to help. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Maya glanced around to make sure nobody was nearby. You ever feel like people get sorted into categories before anyone actually knows them? Adrian felt his pulse quicken slightly. What do you mean? She shrugged. Poor, rich, important, unimportant. Her eyes drifted toward the executive posters displayed near the lobby. The funny thing is, most people decide who deserves respect before they even hear someone speak. Adrian laughed quietly. You sound like you've thought about that a lot. I have. Then she looked directly at him. And I think it's wrong. The simplicity of the statement hit harder than a speech ever could. Not because it was revolutionary, because she actually lived it. She treated customers the same way she treated janitors, the same way she treated managers, The same way she treated him, Eli, the cleaner, not Adrian Vale, not the billionaire, just a person. For the first time in years, Adrian felt seen, not admired, not feared, seen. And there was a difference, a huge one. That night he stayed later than usual, not because he had cleaning duties, because David had delivered another batch of archived records, boxes filled with acquisition files, board correspondence, internal reviews, the kind of documents nobody touched unless lawyers demanded it. Adrian sat alone in a storage room after closing. Page after page, hour after hour. The deeper he searched, the worse the pattern became. Missing attachments, incomplete investigations, approval chains that ended abruptly, people transferred, departments reorganized, records erased. Someone had cleaned up the past, and they had done it professionally. That realization unsettled him, because accidents looked messy. This looked intentional. Near midnight, he found another reference to Rosa Torres. Not a full file, just a mention. A brief note attached to a compliance review. The language was cold, clinical, almost casual. Employee continues raising concerns regarding lending practices in designated markets. Recommend limiting access pending acquisition completion. Adrian stared at the sentence. Limiting access. Such harmless words. Yet behind those words sat a woman's career, a family's future, a lost home. Language had a way of hiding consequences. That thought stayed with him long after he left the building. The next morning, Maya arrived carrying 2 coffees, one for herself, one she hadn't intended to buy. At least that's what she told herself. When she saw Eli replacing supplies near the customer service area, she hesitated, then walked over. Here. Adrian blinked. What's this coffee? I can see that. A tiny laugh escaped her. The first genuine laugh he had heard from her all week. I bought the wrong size and they gave me another one. The lie was obvious. They both knew it. Neither mentioned it. Thanks. You're welcome. She started to leave, then stopped. Eli, yeah. You ever feel like your life ended up somewhere completely different than you planned? The question surprised him. He thought about the penthouse, the board meetings, the billions, the endless responsibility. Then he thought about his father, the expectations, the legacy, the secrets. Every path seemed to lead back there, every day. The answer came honestly. Maya nodded. I wanted to be an accountant. He smiled. You still can. Her expression softened. For a moment she looked younger, like the version of herself who existed before debt and loss and responsibility. Then reality returned. Maybe. The word carried years of disappointment. Adrian wanted to tell her she was talented, capable, smarter than half the executives working for him, but Eli couldn't know those things. So he simply said, I don't think maybe is the same as impossible. Maya stared at him, then smiled again, this time slower, warmer. You know, for a cleaner, you give surprisingly good advice. He laughed. And for a banker, you ask surprisingly difficult questions. The moment felt easy, natural, dangerously natural. And that scared him more than anything, because every day he spent with Maya made the truth harder to reveal. Later that afternoon, Lydia Crane noticed them talking, only for a few seconds. But she noticed. Lydia noticed everything. She watched Maya return to her desk, watched Eli continue working, watched the small smile lingering on Maya's face. Something about it irritated her, not because of romance, because relationships created loyalty, and loyalty created unpredictability. Lydia preferred predictable employees. That evening she reviewed performance reports, customer complaints, internal notes. Then she paused when she saw Maya's name attached to multiple customer commendations. Again, and again, and again. Most managers would have been pleased. Lydia wasn't. People who earned trust attracted attention. Attention led to influence. Influence led to questions. And Lydia had spent years making sure nobody asked too many questions. Meanwhile, Maya arrived home to find Rosa waiting by the kitchen table. The old envelope sat between them. Open. For the first time, Rosa looked frightened, not tired, not sad. Frightened. What happened? Maya asked. Rosa slowly lifted a folded document from the envelope. I missed this before. Maya took it. The paper was older than the others, yellowed, fragile. A hidden page folded into the back of the file. Her eyes scanned the text, then stopped. Her heart skipped, because this wasn't a loan document. It wasn't a foreclosure record. It wasn't financial paperwork at all. It was an internal memo. And across the top, stamped in faded red letters, were words neither woman had ever seen before. Confidential. Below it sat a sentence that made Maya's blood run cold. Not because she fully understood it, because she understood enough. The memo read, Torres' case must be removed before acquisition closes, and beneath that sentence were several approval signatures. Most were unfamiliar, but one wasn't. One belonged to Richard Vale. And for the first time, Maya realized her grandmother might not have been fired because she found the truth. She might have been fired because someone powerful decided the truth needed to disappear. Maya barely touched her dinner that night. The confidential memo sat on the kitchen table between her and Rosa, like something alive. Noah had already gone to bed, but neither woman seemed capable of sleep. For a long time, they simply stared at the paper. 23 years. 23 years of questions. And now they finally had something real. Something with names. Something with signatures. Something that proved Rosa's memories had not been distorted by time. They knew, Maya finally whispered. Rosa remained silent. They knew exactly what was happening. Rosa slowly nodded. I think some of them did. The answer frustrated Maya immediately. Some. Not all. Not enough certainty. Not enough clarity. She wanted a villain. Someone obvious. Someone she could blame. Instead, she kept finding gray areas. Executives who signed documents. Managers who followed orders. People who looked away. People who stayed quiet. People who convinced themselves that someone else would fix it. That was harder to process, because real life rarely handed people a single monster. Sometimes it handed them a system, and systems could hurt thousands while everyone involved told themselves they were doing their jobs. Maya picked up the memo again. Her eyes stopped on Richard Vale's signature. What if he knew everything? Rosa looked tired. What if he did? The question hung in the room. Neither woman answered immediately. Finally, Rosa sighed. If he knew everything, then he failed. Maya looked up. And if he didn't? Rosa's eyes filled with sadness. Then he failed differently. The answer stayed with Maya long after the conversation ended. The next morning she arrived at the branch carrying the same weight she had carried all week. But something had changed. Before she had questions. Now she had evidence. Not enough evidence to understand everything. But enough to know her family had been telling the truth all along. Across the lobby, Adrian noticed her almost immediately. The envelope was back. So was the tension in her shoulders. And now there was something else. Determination. He recognized it because he had seen it in boardrooms, in negotiations, in people who had finally decided they were done accepting easy answers. The problem was that Maya had no idea where her search might lead. Adrian did. And that scared him. Around noon, Lydia Crane gathered the staff for a brief meeting near the customer service area. Her timing was terrible. The lobby was crowded. Customers were waiting. But Lydia cared more about numbers than timing. Our monthly performance review is approaching, she announced. I expect everyone to increase product referrals. Several employees nodded automatically. Maya remained silent. Lydia continued. Checking accounts, refinancing products, premium lending services. Every interaction is an opportunity. Maya glanced toward an elderly couple waiting nearby. The husband looked confused. The wife looked exhausted. Neither looked like people searching for premium products. They looked like people trying to survive. The difference mattered. At least to Maya. Then Lydia said something that made the room uncomfortable. Customers don't always know what's best for them. That's why we're here. Several employees looked down. Adrian saw Maya's jaw tighten. The statement wasn't technically wrong. But something about it felt dangerous, because too many bad decisions started with people believing they knew what was best for someone else. After the meeting ended, Maya found herself helping the same elderly couple she had noticed earlier. The husband explained they had received foreclosure notices after falling behind on mortgage payments following medical expenses. The paperwork was overwhelming, pages and pages of legal language, deadlines, warnings, fine print. Maya spent nearly 40 minutes walking them through everything, not giving legal advice, just helping them understand what they were reading. The relief on their faces was obvious and painful, because no one should feel grateful simply because somebody took the time to explain their options. When they finally left, the wife squeezed Maya's hand. Thank you. Her eyes filled with tears. Everyone else keeps talking at us. You're the first person who talked to us. After they were gone, Maya sat quietly for a moment. The interaction stayed with her, not because it was unusual, because it shouldn't have been. Respect should never feel extraordinary. Yet somehow it did. Later that afternoon, Adrian was replacing supplies near the break room when Maya entered carrying a folder. She looked exhausted, but she also looked calmer than she had in days. Busy day, he asked. She laughed softly. That's one way to describe it. She dropped into a chair. For a few moments, neither spoke. The silence felt familiar now. Comfortable. Safe. Then Maya surprised him. Can I ask you something? Adrian nodded. Sure. She studied him for a second. Why do you work so hard? The question caught him off guard. He almost laughed, if she only knew. I need the paycheck. She smiled. Everybody needs the paycheck, he thought carefully. The real answer was impossible, because the truth involved billions of dollars, board meetings, legacy, pressure, a father whose shadow still stretched across his entire life. Instead, he chose a different truth. Maybe because I don't want my life to be meaningless. Maya stared at him. The answer felt more honest than he intended. After a moment, she nodded. I understand that. You do? Yeah. She looked down at her hands. When my mom died, I spent years feeling like life just happened to people. Her voice softened. Then Noah was born. Adrian listened. Everything changed. She smiled faintly. Suddenly, every choice mattered. For a moment, she seemed somewhere else, thinking about her son, about responsibility, about sacrifice. Then she looked back at him. I think meaning comes from helping people when it's inconvenient. The sentence landed harder than she realized. because Adrian had spent years funding charities, launching initiatives, writing checks. Yet somehow this woman working a temporary customer service position had reduced meaning to one simple idea: helping people when it's inconvenient. Not when cameras were present, not when awards were involved, when it cost something. The thought stayed with him long after she returned to work. That evening, Adrian met David in a secured conference room at corporate headquarters. Several new documents lay spread across the table. David looked uneasy. Not a good sign. "What did you find?" Adrian asked. David rubbed his forehead. "More acquisition records. And I think we've been looking at the wrong question." Adrian frowned. "What does that mean?" "We keep asking whether Richard knew." Silence. David slid a folder across the table. "Maybe the bigger question is why certain records disappeared after he signed them." Adrian opened the file. Inside were document transfer logs, archival requests, authorization records, names, dates, departments. One detail immediately stood out. Several files connected to Rosa Torres had been removed months after the acquisition closed. Not before. After. His stomach tightened. "Who authorized this?" David pointed to a name. Not Richard Vale. Not even someone from Richard's executive team. Someone else. Someone much lower. Yet connected to powerful people. A legal advisor named Martin Hensley. The name meant nothing to Adrian, but David wasn't finished. Hensley became head of compliance 6 months later. Adrian stared at the documents. A promotion after evidence disappeared. The timing felt ugly. Very ugly. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Then Adrian looked at another page and froze, because Martin Hensley's name appeared again, not in old records, in current records. Current. The man wasn't retired, wasn't gone. He still worked for Vale National Bank. And according to the organizational chart sitting on top of the folder, Martin Hensley now reported directly to the executive division overseeing branch compliance reviews, including South Detroit, including Lydia Crane's region. Adrian slowly looked up. Something cold settled in his chest. Because for the first time, this wasn't just history anymore. Part of it was still alive. Still working inside the bank. Still protected, still close enough to touch. And suddenly Adrian realized that someone inside Vale National might have spent 2 decades making sure the truth stayed buried. Which meant the danger Maya was walking toward might be far more current than either of them had imagined. The following week, South Detroit's branch hosted a community banking event. It happened 4 times a year. Management loved it because it generated positive publicity. Customers came because they hoped someone would finally listen. Folding tables were set up in the lobby. Coffee stations appeared near the entrance. Brochures covered nearly every available surface. Employees were instructed to smile more than usual. By 9 in the morning, the building was already crowded. Retirees arrived carrying folders filled with paperwork. Young families came with questions about loans. Small business owners brought account statements, and mixed among them were people carrying something heavier than documents. Fear. Maya recognized it immediately. Fear had a look, a hesitation before asking questions, an apology before requesting help, a quiet assumption that they would be treated like a problem. She spent most of the morning moving from one customer to another, explaining, listening, helping. By noon, she had already skipped lunch. Again. Across the lobby, Adrian watched from behind his cleaner's cart. He was beginning to notice a pattern. Whenever customers looked lost, they found Maya. Not because she had the highest position, because she made them feel safe enough to ask questions. And that kind of trust couldn't be trained. It had to be earned. Shortly after noon, an elderly man named Walter Jenkins approached Maya's desk. He carried a thick folder secured with rubber bands. His hands shook slightly, not from age alone, from stress. My daughter told me I should get a second opinion. Maya smiled gently. About what? He placed the folder on the desk. My mortgage. The answer surprised her. Most mortgage issues were handled elsewhere. Still, she opened the file. The moment she began reading, something felt wrong. The paperwork showed late payment penalties, administrative charges, processing fees, review fees, fees attached to fees. None were technically illegal, but together they created something troubling. The debt had grown far beyond the original missed payments. Walter leaned forward. I've paid for 30 years. His voice cracked. Now they're telling me I might lose my house. Maya continued reviewing the documents. Her stomach tightened. The numbers didn't feel random. They followed a pattern. A familiar pattern. The same pattern she had seen inside Rosa's old files. Different forms, different decade, same structure. She checked another page, then another, then another. The same approval codes appeared repeatedly, the same internal review department, the same category labels. Something inside her sharpened. This wasn't coincidence. At least it didn't feel like coincidence. Mr. Jenkins, she said carefully, has anyone fully explained these charges to you? The old man shook his head. They just keep mailing letters. Maya nodded slowly. Let me look deeper. Nearby, Lydia noticed the interaction. Immediately, her eyes narrowed. She walked over before Maya could continue. What seems to be the issue? Maya looked up. I'm reviewing his account. Lydia glanced at the file, then immediately tried to close the conversation. Mortgage servicing handles those matters. Walter looked defeated. The reaction happened instantly, as if he'd heard those words many times before. Maya noticed. So did Adrian. He's already spoken to servicing, Maya replied. He still has questions. Lydia's smile tightened. The process exists for a reason. The statement sounded professional, reasonable, yet somehow it felt wrong, because process had become a shield, a way to avoid responsibility. Walter lowered his head. I don't want trouble. Maya leaned toward him. You're not causing trouble. Those 5 words changed everything. The old man's eyes filled with tears. Not because she solved the problem, because she acknowledged his dignity, something many people had stopped doing. Lydia looked visibly uncomfortable. She hated situations she couldn't control, and Maya was becoming increasingly difficult to control. That afternoon, after Walter left, Maya stayed behind, studying copies of his documents. Several details bothered her. The approval pathways, the fee structures, the timing. Most people would never notice. But accounting had always come naturally to her. Numbers told stories, and sometimes they revealed things people tried very hard to hide. She opened a spreadsheet, then another. Then another. Patterns started emerging. Certain zip codes appeared repeatedly. Lower income neighborhoods, older borrowers, customers with limited financial resources. Her pulse quickened. The similarities were impossible to ignore. The same communities seemed to suffer disproportionately. Not always, not universally, but often enough to raise questions. Very serious questions. Later that afternoon, Adrian found her sitting alone, reviewing documents. She looked completely absorbed, focused in a way he had never seen before. Not emotional, analytical, sharp. He approached quietly. Still working, Maya didn't immediately answer. Her eyes remained fixed on the screen. Finally, she exhaled. "I think something's wrong." The statement instantly got his attention. "What kind of wrong?" She hesitated, partly because she wasn't sure, partly because she didn't want to sound paranoid. "I don't know yet." That answer was honest, and that's the problem. Adrian sat nearby. Not too close. Just close enough. Maya pointed toward the screen. Different customers, different years, different products. She scrolled downward, but the same outcomes. He studied her face. The excitement, the concern, the determination. She looked like someone solving a puzzle she never expected to find. Maybe it's coincidence. The suggestion sounded weak even to him. Maya shook her head. "I thought that at first." She opened another file, then another. Too many similarities. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Maya looked at him. "You ever get the feeling a story is hiding underneath the numbers?" Adrian almost laughed. Because that was exactly what he had been discovering for weeks. The numbers never existed alone. There were always people underneath them. Families. Dreams. Mistakes. Consequences. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think that happens more than people realize." That evening, Adrian received a call from David. The moment he answered, he knew something important had happened. David sounded different, more urgent. "I found another connection." Adrian sat upright. "What kind of connection?" "The current complaints. Silence. The ones Maya's seeing." Adrian's heart skipped. "What about them?" David took a breath. "I compared current compliance reports against archived records." Adrian waited. "The same review department keeps appearing." His stomach tightened. "You're sure positive?" The room suddenly felt colder, because that meant the issue wasn't isolated. It wasn't entirely historical. Some version of the problem still existed. Not identical, not as obvious, but alive. Still operating, still affecting people. After ending the call, Adrian sat alone for nearly an hour. Thinking. For the first time, the investigation no longer felt like a search for his father's mistakes. It felt like a search for something ongoing, something current, something dangerous. The next morning, the community event continued. Customers filled the branch again. Among them was a senior compliance officer visiting from regional headquarters. His name was Arthur Calder. Most employees barely noticed him. Maya did. Not because of his title, because he quietly spent hours observing customer interactions, listening more than speaking, watching more than talking. By mid-afternoon, he had seen Maya help 8 different customers. He had watched her explain paperwork others ignored. He had watched her catch 2 processing mistakes. He had watched her identify a fee discrepancy nobody else noticed. Eventually, he approached her desk. "You studied accounting?" The question surprised her. "A little?" Arthur raised an eyebrow. A little. Maya smiled awkwardly. "I never finished." Arthur looked unconvinced, because what he had witnessed all day didn't look like unfinished talent. It looked like hidden talent, the kind that rarely received opportunities. Before Maya could answer further, Arthur handed her a business card. Then he lowered his voice. "If you ever find something unusual in those files you're reviewing, don't bring it to branch management first." Maya froze. Arthur's expression remained calm. "Professional. Careful." But his eyes carried a warning. A real warning. Then he added one final sentence. The sentence stayed with Maya long after he walked away. And across the room, Adrian heard every word. Arthur Calder had quietly said, "This is bigger than a branch problem." Then he glanced toward Lydia's office. And finished. "This goes back to your father's board. Arthur Calder's warning followed Maya home. It stayed with her during dinner. It stayed with her while helping Noah finish homework. It stayed with her long after the apartment fell quiet. This goes back to your father's board. The sentence refused to leave her alone. Because Arthur hadn't sounded dramatic. He hadn't sounded emotional. He had sounded careful. And careful people rarely made statements like that without reason. Around midnight, Maya sat alone at the kitchen table with the old documents spread before her. The confidential memo, the foreclosure records, the internal notes, the signatures. She studied them again. Then again. The deeper she looked, the more one question haunted her. If so many people knew something was wrong, why had nobody stopped it? Across town, Adrian was asking himself the exact same question. He sat alone in his father's old office. Very few people knew the room still existed. After Richard Vale died, the bank renovated most executive spaces. But this office had remained largely untouched. Locked, preserved, almost like a museum. For years, Adrian rarely entered it. Tonight was different. Arthur Calder's warning had changed something. The investigation was no longer about scattered complaints. It was no longer about one branch manager. It was no longer about one family's tragedy. The deeper Adrian dug, the more obvious it became that someone had spent decades burying evidence. And somehow every trail kept circling back to his father. He hated that. Not because he feared the truth, because he loved the man whose name sat at the center of it. Richard Vale had not been a perfect father, but he had been a good one. At least Adrian believed he had. He remembered fishing trips, school events, volunteer projects, long conversations about integrity. His father had built hospitals, funded scholarships, created financial literacy programs. The image in Adrian's memory refused to match the image emerging from the investigation. Yet both existed. And reality demanded an explanation. David stood near the doorway watching him. "You don't have to do this tonight." "Yes, I do." David nodded. Neither argued. Some answers arrived only when a person became desperate enough to find them. The office contained hundreds of items, old photographs, awards, personal notebooks, financial journals. Most revealed nothing useful. Then Adrian opened a locked cabinet hidden behind a shelf. The key had taken 2 days to locate. Inside sat 3 storage boxes, all labeled in his father's handwriting. Private. The sight immediately unsettled him. Richard had rarely hidden anything from family. The existence of private files suggested something important, or something painful. For the next hour, Adrian searched quietly. Letters, meeting notes, correspondence, personal reflections. Then he found it. A thick folder marked Community Lending Review. His pulse quickened. He opened it. Inside were reports connected to the same period as Rosa Torres's case. Many pages were familiar, others were entirely new, pages that never appeared in official archives, pages somebody had removed. Adrian immediately understood why. The contents were devastating. Internal analysts had identified serious concerns years before the acquisition closed. Patterns existed. Hidden fees existed. Disproportionate impacts on low-income communities existed. Warnings had been issued repeatedly. People knew. His hands tightened around the papers. For several moments he simply stared. Then he noticed something unexpected. A separate document attached near the back. A handwritten note, his father's handwriting. Richard Vale had written, "Investigation findings credible. Immediate review required." Adrian froze. That wasn't the language of someone ignoring the problem. It was the language of someone acknowledging it. He kept reading. Another note appeared. Then another, Then another. Every page complicated the story. His father had known. That much was undeniable. But the documents revealed something else. Richard had not dismissed the concerns. He had pushed for internal review. He had ordered additional audits. He had requested corrective action. The discovery should have relieved Adrian. Instead, it confused him even more. Because if Richard tried to address the problem, why had Rosa lost everything? Why had files disappeared? Why had evidence vanished? Why had nobody received justice? The answer arrived 30 pages later, and it hit harder than anything before it. A letter, typed, unsigned, never sent, addressed to Rosa Torres. Adrian stared at the name, then began reading. The letter acknowledged the investigation, acknowledged failures, acknowledged harm. It admitted that concerns raised by internal auditors had merit. It admitted certain lending programs should have been suspended earlier. Most shocking of all, it admitted Richard intended to establish a compensation fund for families affected by the practices. Adrian read every line twice, then a third time. The room felt silent, heavy. His father had tried to act, not perfectly, not quickly enough, but he had tried. Then Adrian reached the final paragraph, and everything changed. Richard wrote, "I should have acted sooner. I believed I could correct the problem quietly while protecting the institution and the employees who depended on it. I was wrong. Every month of delay created new victims. Leadership means accepting consequences even when they are costly." Adrian lowered the page. His chest hurt. Not because the letter cleared his father. It didn't. If anything, it made the tragedy worse. Richard wasn't innocent. He wasn't ignorant. He had known. He had delayed. He had hesitated. He had tried balancing morality against business risk, and real families paid the price for that hesitation. The truth wasn't black and white. It was gray. Painfully gray. David broke the silence. What happened to the compensation fund? Adrian looked back at the folder. More documents answered that question. The fund had been approved internally. Preliminary structures existed. Budget allocations existed. Legal frameworks existed. Then everything stopped. One date explained why. Richard Vale died unexpectedly 3 months later. The project never moved forward. The board dissolved it. The records disappeared. The affected families were forgotten, or intentionally ignored. Adrian leaned back slowly. For the first time in weeks, tears filled his eyes. Not dramatic tears. Not public tears. The kind that came when someone discovered a truth too complicated for anger. His father had failed. That much was undeniable. But he had not failed because he didn't care. He had failed because he cared too late. Because he feared consequences. Because he believed he could manage the crisis quietly. Because he chose caution when courage was required. And now generations were living with the results. Meanwhile, Maya sat with Rosa reviewing Arthur Calder's warning. The old woman listened carefully, then looked away. "I've seen this before." Maya frowned. "What do you mean the people who know the truth become dangerous?" The statement landed heavily, because Rosa wasn't speaking theoretically. She was speaking from experience. Maya looked down at the documents. Part of her wanted to stop, to protect Noah, to protect her job, to protect the fragile stability she had fought so hard to build. But another part refused. Too many people had already suffered. Too many questions remained unanswered. If she walked away now, the story would stay buried. And buried stories rarely stopped causing harm. The following afternoon, Adrian met Arthur Calder privately. No cleaners, no disguises, no witnesses. Just two men sitting across from each other in a secured conference room. Arthur listened as Adrian described the letter, the compensation fund, the missing records, the dissolved program. When Adrian finished, Arthur remained silent for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. I always suspected something like this. You knew I knew someone stopped the investigation. Arthur leaned forward. But I never knew why. Adrian stared at him. What happens now? Arthur's answer came immediately. You decide whether protecting the legend matters more than fixing the damage. The words struck like a hammer. Because that was the choice, not the bank, not the board, not history. Him. Arthur stood, then added one final piece of information. Something Adrian hadn't expected. Something that changed everything. The compensation fund wasn't completely erased. Adrian's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? Arthur slid a document across the table. An account number, a trust structure, a dormant financial vehicle hidden inside corporate archives. The fund still existed, buried, frozen, forgotten, but alive. And attached to it was a list of families originally scheduled for review. One name appeared near the top. Torres. Adrian stared at it, then at the account, then back at Arthur, because suddenly he understood. The truth had not died with his father. Someone had locked it away. And now he possessed the key. The only question remaining was whether opening that door would destroy everything his family had spent decades building. The announcement arrived on a Monday morning. Every employee at the South Detroit branch received the same email. A visit from corporate leadership, mandatory attendance, business attire required, additional customer service review procedures would be conducted throughout the day. The moment Lydia Crane read it, her entire demeanor changed. By 8 o'clock, she was walking through the branch like a storm. Counters were inspected. Files were reviewed. Employees were corrected over tiny details nobody had cared about the week before. Even the flowers near the entrance were replaced. Someone important was coming. And Lydia wanted everything perfect. What exactly is happening? One teller whispered. No idea. Maybe an audit. Maybe a promotion review. Nobody knew. Only Adrian knew. And for the first time since he had stepped into the building wearing a cleaner's uniform, he felt nervous. Not because of the board, not because of the media, not because of the executives waiting downtown. Because of Maya. The truth he was about to reveal would hurt her. There was no version of events where it wouldn't. That reality sat heavily inside him all morning. Meanwhile, Maya noticed something else. Eli wasn't there. At first she assumed he was running late. Then she assumed he had been assigned elsewhere. By 10 o'clock, she felt uneasy. By 11, she felt concerned. By noon, she caught herself looking toward the maintenance closet for the 5th time. No sign of him. The feeling surprised her. Over the past weeks, Eli had quietly become part of her daily routine. Not through grand gestures, not through romance, through presence, conversations during breaks, small moments, the comfort of speaking with someone who listened without judgment. She had never intended to depend on that. Yet, somehow she did. At lunch, she finally asked another employee, "Have you seen Eli?" The woman shrugged. "No, nobody knows where he is. Maybe corporate reassigned him." The answer bothered Maya more than it should have. Across town, Adrian stood inside a private conference room surrounded by executives. David was there. Arthur Calder was there. Several attorneys were there. And stacked on the table were copies of documents that had remained hidden for more than 2 decades. The compensation fund, the internal investigations, the removed files, the unsent letter. The evidence was overwhelming. No one in the room argued that change was necessary. The disagreement centered on something else: reputation. The announcement will damage the bank. One executive sounded nervous, another sounded angry, a third sounded frightened. Adrian listened quietly, then looked around the room. For years he had heard similar arguments. Protect the institution, manage exposure, limit fallout, words that sounded responsible, words that often delayed accountability. Finally he stood. My father delayed action because he feared consequences. The room fell silent. I'm not repeating that mistake. Nobody spoke after that, because everyone understood the decision had already been made. By 1 o'clock, black vehicles began arriving outside the South Detroit branch. Customers noticed first, then employees, then Lydia. Excitement spread immediately. Executives rarely visited this location, certainly not in person, certainly not in large numbers. Lydia nearly ran toward the entrance. Her smile looked almost painful from the effort. Maya remained behind her desk, helping a customer. She barely glanced up, at least until she heard the whispers. The owner is coming. The owner, the CEO. That got her attention. Vail National's CEO almost never visited individual branches. Most employees had only seen him in photographs, magazine covers, corporate videos, news interviews. Maya looked toward the entrance, then back toward her customer. Work came first, at least until the lobby suddenly went quiet. Completely quiet. The kind of silence that only happened when something unexpected entered a room. Maya looked up and froze. For 1 second, her brain refused to process what she was seeing. The man walking through the doors wore an expensive dark suit. Corporate executives followed behind him. Security remained nearby. Everyone in the building seemed focused on him. But Maya wasn't looking at the suit. She wasn't looking at the executives. She wasn't looking at the security. She was looking at his face. A face she knew. A face she had spoken to almost every day for weeks. Eli. No, not Eli. Adrian Vail, the billionaire owner of Vail National Bank. The room tilted. Not physically, emotionally. Nothing made sense. Every conversation replayed inside her mind. The coffee, the lunch breaks, the advice, the jokes, the trust. All of it suddenly looked different. Across the lobby, Adrian saw recognition spread across Maya's face, then shock, then disbelief, then something worse. Pain. That hurt more than anything else. Employees around her began whispering. Some stared openly. Others looked embarrassed. Lydia appeared completely stunned. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Adrian stepped forward. His voice remained calm, professional, controlled. Good afternoon. The words echoed through the branch. My name is Adrian Vail, as if anyone needed confirmation. Everyone already knew. I came here today because this branch helped reveal serious concerns within our organization. The room remained silent. No one moved. No one interrupted. For the next 20 minutes, Adrian explained everything. Not every detail, not every secret, but enough. An independent investigation, archived records, compliance failures, customer impact reviews, the reopening of a dormant compensation fund, the immediate suspension of several controversial fee structures. Arthur Calder stood nearby, confirming each announcement. The branch employees looked stunned. Customers looked confused. Lydia looked terrified. Then Adrian said something nobody expected. He turned toward Maya. The entire room followed his gaze. Maya Torres. Her name sounded too loud, too public, too exposed. She stood slowly. Every eye in the building focused on her. Adrian continued. Many of these findings came to light because employees were willing to ask difficult questions. Maya felt trapped, cornered. She didn't want recognition. She didn't want attention. Most importantly, she didn't want this. Not from him. Ms. Torres demonstrated extraordinary integrity and commitment to our customers. People began clapping. The sound felt distant, meaningless, because none of them understood what was actually happening. The applause stopped. Maya looked directly at Adrian, and for the first time he saw no warmth in her eyes, only hurt. After the meeting ended, customers slowly returned to their business. Employees gathered in small groups. Shock spread through the branch like electricity. Nobody talked about anything else. Meanwhile, Maya walked into an empty conference room and closed the door. She needed space. She needed air. She needed to think. A few moments later, the door opened. Adrian entered. Neither spoke immediately. The silence between them felt completely different now. Not comfortable, not safe, heavy. Finally, Adrian broke it. Maya, how long? The question cut through him. He stopped. How long, what? How long did you know me? Her voice remained calm. That somehow made it worse. How long were you pretending? Adrian struggled to answer. Because there was no answer that sounded good. No answer that erased the deception. A few weeks? Maya laughed softly. The sound contained no humor. A few weeks? She looked away, shook her head. I told you things. The statement hurt, because it was true. You trusted me. Yes. The word landed like a punch. Neither spoke for several seconds. Then Adrian stepped forward. What I felt wasn't fake. Maya immediately looked back at him. Anger flashed across her face. Not explosive anger. The kind that came from disappointment. The kind that came when someone mattered. You wanted honesty from everyone in this bank. Her voice trembled slightly. You built an entire investigation around honesty. Adrian couldn't argue, because she was right. Then Maya said the thing he had been fearing since the moment he decided to reveal himself. The thing he knew would come eventually. You weren't just Eli. Her eyes filled with pain. You were Adrian Vale. Silence. You were Richard Vale's son. More silence. My family lost everything because of that name. The room felt smaller, heavier. Maya took a slow breath, then shook her head. I don't even know who you are anymore. And as she turned toward the door, Adrian realized something devastating. The investigation had uncovered the truth. The compensation fund could be restored. The bank could be repaired. The damage could be addressed. But none of those victories could give him back the trust of the one person who had cared about him before she knew he was a billionaire. And for the first time in years, Adrian understood that some losses couldn't be solved with power. Some had to be earned back, if they could be earned back at all. Maya did not return to the bank the following week, or the week after that. The media attention surrounding Adrian's announcement spread faster than anyone expected. Reporters wanted interviews. Financial analysts wanted statements. Former customers wanted answers. Maya wanted none of it. She took unpaid leave and stayed home with Noah and Rosa. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to stop running. Not forever. Just long enough to breathe. Long enough to think. Long enough to separate her feelings for Eli from the truth about Adrian Vale. The distinction mattered, because both men were the same person. Yet somehow they felt different. One was the billionaire who inherited a complicated legacy. The other was the cleaner who carried trash bags, listened without interrupting, and treated her son like he mattered. For weeks, she struggled to reconcile those two realities. Meanwhile, Adrian never called, never showed up unexpectedly, never used his position to force a conversation. He sent exactly one message, a simple one. Take all the time you need. Nothing more, no defense, no excuses, no request for forgiveness, just space. And strangely, that helped more than any apology could have. Because for the first time, Maya saw that Adrian wasn't trying to win her back. He was trying to do what should have been done years ago. The bank released thousands of pages of archived records. Independent auditors were granted full access. The dormant compensation fund Richard Vale had tried to create was formally restored under outside supervision. Affected families began receiving legal assistance, financial reviews, mortgage corrections, settlement opportunities. Not everyone could be made whole. Too much time had passed. Some losses could never be recovered. But accountability had finally begun. That mattered. More than headlines. More than public relations. More than money. It mattered because people who had spent years feeling invisible were finally being seen. One afternoon, Maya sat beside Rosa while reading another news article about the reforms. Rosa quietly folded the newspaper and set it aside. He looks tired. Maya glanced at the photo. Adrian stood before cameras answering difficult questions, accepting criticism, refusing to hide behind lawyers or corporate language. He did look tired. Rosa smiled softly. Good. Maya laughed despite herself. Good tired people are usually carrying something real. The old woman stared toward the window. For the first time, I think he's carrying responsibility. Several months later, the changes inside Vale National became impossible to ignore. New oversight programs appeared. Customer review procedures changed. Predatory fee structures were removed. Compliance departments expanded. Arthur Calder led many of the reforms. And one day Maya received a phone call. The offer surprised her. Not because of the position, because of how reasonable it was. Junior compliance accountant, not executive, not manager, not some unbelievable promotion handed to her because she knew the CEO. A real job. An entry-level opportunity based on her actual skills. The first real chance she had been given since life forced her to abandon college years earlier. She accepted. And she earned every step afterward. The work was difficult. The hours were long. The learning curve was steep. But Maya loved it. For the first time, she wasn't just helping customers after problems appeared. She was helping prevent problems before they happened. Months turned into more months. Slowly, people began recognizing her work. Not because of Adrian. Because she was good at it. Very good. A year later, she became compliance supervisor. The title felt satisfying. Not because it sounded impressive, because it represented something she had nearly lost faith in. A second chance. One evening after a long day at work, Maya found Adrian waiting outside a small coffee shop near the riverfront. Not waiting dramatically, not trying to surprise her. They had spoken occasionally over the previous months, carefully, slowly. Two people rebuilding trust, one conversation at a time. He looked up when he saw her, and smiled, the same smile he used to wear when he was pushing a cleaning cart through the branch. That smile made her laugh. You know, she said, sitting across from him, it's still weird seeing you without a mop. Adrian shook his head. I knew that joke was coming. For a while, they talked about ordinary things. Noah's school, Rosa's health, work, life. Nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic, just two people learning how to be honest with each other. Eventually, Maya became quiet. Adrian noticed immediately. What is it? She studied him for a moment, then smiled. You know what finally made me forgive you? His expression softened. What? It wasn't the money. Adrian nodded. He had expected that answer. It wasn't the compensation fund. Again he nodded. Maya looked down at her coffee. then back at him. It was watching you tell the truth when the truth cost you something. The words settled gently between them. Because they were true. She had met plenty of wealthy people, plenty of powerful people, but responsibility was rare, much rarer than success. Adrian looked away briefly, as if absorbing the weight of what she had said. Then he smiled. Not proudly. Gratefully. For the first time, Maya realized something important. She had seen Adrian's worth long before she knew he was a billionaire. But Adrian had only become worthy of her trust after he chose to use his power to repair harm instead of protect himself from it. That was the difference. And that difference changed everything. Several months later, Maya walked through the doors of the South Detroit branch with Noah beside her. The building looked different now. The atmosphere felt different too. Customers received more support. Policies were clearer. Employees received ethics training. People actually listened. Noah looked around curiously. This is the bank. Maya smiled. Yep, the one Grandma always talked about. For a moment she thought about the past, the lost house, the buried files, the years of struggle. Then she thought about the families receiving help, the reforms, the accountability, the healing that had finally begun. It's not the same bank anymore. Noah nodded as if he understood. Maybe he did. Maybe children understood more than adults gave them credit for. As they walked through the lobby, Maya noticed a cleaner working near the entrance. Most people passed without looking. Maya didn't. She smiled and thanked him. The man smiled back. A simple moment. Easy to miss. Yet somehow it felt important. Because that was where everything had started. Not with billions of dollars, not with hidden files, not with corporate power, with one person choosing to treat another person with dignity. And sometimes, that was enough to change a life. Maybe even many lives. If this story touched you, think about someone who treated you with kindness when you had nothing to offer in return. Share that memory in the comments, and stay with us for more stories that remind us how much simple human decency can matter.